The way in which he's behaved has been that of a spoilt teenager. I remember being told by a friend that he insisted that he have the extension 007 in one of the royal palaces because he felt that he was the royal family's own answer, obviously, to James Bond. And I think that seclusion, internal exile or time abroad has to be the answer.
When you say exile, do you mean metaphorical exile as in or do you mean literally moving to another country, physical exile? Because there is some kind of precedent for that with Juan Carlos of Spain.
Whether it's thick or obtuse or insensitive, it's not just that he's incapable of taking a hint. He doesn't even recognise a hint when it arrives in a dinner jacket, presenting itself with heralds shouting, "Here comes the hint." He just doesn't get it.
To be fair, Maccabi is a club that has that reputation. It's sort of like the Millwall of Israel. I don't think 10 years ago people would have been talking about, for example, cousin marriage.
Looking for all the world like an LSD-infused image of Del Boy.
My first thought was Peaky Blinders but gay.
Hello and welcome to Quite Right. I'm Michael Gove, editor of The Spectator.
And I'm Madeline Grant, assistant editor of The Spectator and parliamentary sketch writer.
And this week, Maddie and I will be discussing the Duke of York, as he no longer is, Birmingham, and why it's become the epicentre of the Middle East conflict, and also the British Museum's attempts to emulate the Met Gala and what it tells us about camp and conflict in our cultural establishment. This week, Prince Andrew, no longer the Duke of York, has been uncomfortably in the spotlight again. Years after the interview that he gave to Newsnight and Emily Maitlis, in which his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, the notorious paedophile, was laid bare for all to see, one of his victims, or alleged victims, Virginia Giuffre, has published a book, From Beyond the Grave. And in the book, she outlines the full extent of Epstein's abuse of her, but more particularly reminds everyone of the role that Prince Andrew played as Epstein's close friend, even to the extent we now understand of Andrew having emailed Epstein in 2011 after he said that he'd ended ties with him, pledging allegiance, saying that they were both in it together. There's been pressure, of course, this week, Maddie, following on from those revelations, following on from the publication of the book, for Andrew not just to give up, as he has at the King's request, the title of Duke of York and the fact that he's a Knight of the Garter, but actually to be stripped of his remaining honour, such as it is, and no longer to be Prince Andrew, but to be plain Mr. Andrew Windsor, or Andrew Saxe Coburg Gotha, I suppose. Do you think that the pursuit of Andrew is seemly, appropriate, justice delayed?
That's certainly how it feels, because, of course, there was that huge settlement that the royal family reached with Virginia Giuffre some years ago, which settled it out of court and, of course, meant that, her allegations were never dealt with in a court of law. But the court of public opinion, I think, is very firmly on the side that Andrew is guilty and was associating in, I think this is irrefutable, in this louche, dodgy, despicable world that we are gradually learning more and more about. And I think one reason for this action by the royal family is that the fear that there may be more to come.
Into this murky world, the figure of Andrew looms. Giuffre claims in her book a number of sexual encounters with Andrew. Obviously, Andrew vigorously denies that those took place. But what is undeniable is that Andrew was, in Epstein's house, a friend of Ghislaine Maxwell's and someone who stayed in touch with him even after his sentencing in disgrace, as we know. And above all, seems to have shown no contrition or regret. The suggestion is that he paid money to Giuffre to ensure that the Queen's platinum jubilee was not overshadowed. But even there, the inference is that he was doing it to spare the Queen embarrassment rather than because of any acknowledgement of guilt on his part. And there seems to be an insensitivity
Absolutely.
about the way in which Andrew behaves, at the very least at every turn, that creates an irradiating effect on the monarchy overall.
Quite right. There's also a feeling in that world, I think, that the men who operate within it, powerful, have become to see themselves as completely unassailable and entitled to everything the world has to offer, even underage women. But what those emails prove is that when Prince Andrew was solemnly assuring Mateless that he'd never heard of Virginia Giuffre, he and Epstein had been in communication explicitly about her and exchanging information about her. So it proves that he is, objectively a liar, if nothing else. And of course, once that's been proven, it's very hard to take anything else seriously that such an individual would try to claim.
And the position in which Andrew now finds himself has clearly provoked a reaction from other members of the royal family. So the statement that he gave saying that he was no longer to be Duke of York and that he was going to stop being Knight of the Garter and so on was framed in the way that politicians often do when they're resigning, in order to avoid being, quotes, a distraction. You do this. And so it's a way of saying, oh, all right, it's a fair cop, but I'm not really guilty after all. But it won't end here, because Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has been clear to his friends that he regards this as very far from being the end of the affair, that Andrew, were he still alive, would not be welcome at William's coronation. And, of course, there's a pressure in the House of Commons, led by the SNP, but still with widespread backing, to strip Andrew of his remaining title as well. And then adding to the sense that within the royal household, there's a desire to ensure that Andrew faces additional punishment, has been the release of a Freedom of Information request at remarkable speed, showing that the home that he has in the lee of Windsor Castle is one in which he's only been paying a peppercorn rent, i.e. nothing, for years, hasn't paid any tax on it. In effect, he's been living in subsidised splendour, if you can call it that.
Yes. I also wonder, does the very strong reaction in recent days, is that a sign perhaps that Prince William is now taking more control of the of the monarchy than we've seen thus far?
I think it is. And I think that we wouldn't have some of the briefing that we've had unless William had been clear that he wanted to demonstrate, as he has done actually in on the record interviews, that he has his own agenda and that he wants to push it forward. That on everything from homelessness to a greater degree, he hopes, of informality in the future, he's sketching out what his own monarchy, what his own reign would look like. In the case of Andrew, I think one of the reasons why there'll be briefing is, and I know this myself from my own encounters with him, and the work that friends have done when they've been working with him, is that he is, whether it's thick or obtuse or insensitive, just someone who, it's not just that he's incapable of taking a hint. He doesn't even recognise a hint when it arrives in a dinner jacket, presenting itself with heralds shouting, "Here comes the hint." He just doesn't get it. And, part of the curious thing...
Pig-headed,
exactly.
arrogant,
Part of the curious thing about the royal family and courts and so on is that often it's the case that a raised eyebrow will signal something. So if you're a government minister or cabinet minister and you're in the Privy Council and the monarch is probably wearying of your presence, then it will be the case that there'll be a discreet raised eyebrow from a member of the court, from the Privy Council clerk or the King or Queen's private secretary, that will lead you to know that the sentence that you're gabbling to fill the conversational gap at that point should come quickly to a close. It is time to depart. So everyone around the monarch knows that the simple arching of a single eyebrow can tell you how to behave. But yet here you have the late Queen's son, the King's brother, who even when there is a public clamour the like of which even a Marie Antoinette could not have noticed, still remains, as you say, pig-headedly determined not to respond.
Yes, and one of the things I really do admire about the royal family, certain members of the royal family not included in this, is the sense of duty and service and often humility that comes with it, which is somewhat, many people listening will say that's paradoxical. The whole point of the royal family is not to be humble, but in a way it is. It's about saying the crown is what's important. My sense of an individual is subservient to that, and I'm also here to serve. So that is quite an extraordinary thing. But Andrew, I should say, was never like that. You know, he was always interested in globe-trotting. There was this international jet set. There was the extraordinary profligacy before you even get into the murkier allegations towards him. It just didn't seem to me at all in keeping with how I think the royal family should be.
No. Andrew has done one incredibly noble and brave thing in his life, which is to serve in the Falklands. But he's traded off that ever since. And it's even the case that the way in which he's behaved has been that of a spoilt teenager. I remember being told by a friend that he insisted that he have the extension 007 in one of the royal palaces because he felt that he was the royal family's own answer, obviously, to James Bond. So there is I hesitate to say childish simplicity, but there is a male adolescent pig-headedness, and you see it also in the way in which he approaches women, where he behaves like a high school jock who assumes that he has, if this isn't too much of a stretch, droit de seigneur over anyone who comes or came within his purview. You think now that the man is in his 60s, is it possible that he can appreciate the mistakes that he's made and show genuine contrition? It would appear not, which is why I do understand why the Prince of Wales thinks, in effect, the only way to deal with this is some form of exile. If he won't jump, then he needs to be shoved. I do think that sometimes, for the sake of an institution, you have to walk. And in the same way as Captain Oates left the tent when he knew that his presence was not conducive to the success of Scott's ambition to reach the South Pole, there was, in the same way as he walked, Andrew should walk, though I do hope that the monarchy is more successful ultimately than Captain Scott.
Yes, I hope it's more Roald Amundsen than Scott, for sure. But when you say exile, do you mean metaphorical exile as in he or do you mean literally moving to another country, physical exile? Because there is some kind of precedent for that with Juan Carlos of Spain. He was obviously done for corruption, and I can't actually remember where he moved, but he basically moved to a different country. Do you think that's something Andrew ought to do for the good of the monarchy?
Yes, a best example to which people often return, but I still think it's a valid one, is that of John Profumo, who, after he resigned as Minister of War in 1963, I think, because of an affair he had with Christine Keeler, who was also having an affair with a Soviet naval attaché, because of all that, he then dedicated the rest of his life to charity and working in Toynbee Hall. I'm not sure what residual skills, Andrew has, but I would have thought the right thing to do would have been to devote what remaining years he has to quiet service somewhere, well away from the glare of any form of publicity, but in particular for him, deliberately not to be in the public glare or associated with the monarchy, because the fact that he regards any sort of royal occasion, whether it's the inevitably sad funeral of any member of his family or anything like that, he regards it as his right to be there. And I think that seclusion, internal exile, or time abroad has to be the answer. I
just wondered, though, how in the long term, how the royal family will resolve its ongoing problem, fundamentally, of the size of the royal family. The king has a long-stated ambition to have a sort of slimmed down royal family, and he was quite instrumental in that. But of course, with the departure of Prince Harry to America, and now with Andrew's defenestration, and I suspect through no fault of their own, this means that Beatrice and Eugenie may be somewhat tainted by association as well. It doesn't actually leave that many, because as we mentioned before, many of the working royals are now, in their 80s and 90s, and of course the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales are obviously children and too young to be taking part. So, I'm sure she would be. Princess Anne can't do everything. I'm sure she would if she could. But it does slightly raise the question of who's going to carry all these engagements out into the near future.
Who would you have? So do you think that Princess Anne's children?
I think, yes. I think I would immediately, if they were up for it, I think I'd make Mark Tyndall an Earl or something, and see if Zara wanted to come back into the fold.
My one worry is that Prince William doesn't seem to have the same affection for Scotland that his father and grandmother had. So it is the case, of course, that the king loves Balmoral and Birkhall. The Queen did as well. But it is noticeable that the Prince of Wales has never been seen in a kilt, doesn't spend much time in Braemar or
Has he
Balmoral.
ever been to the Highland Games? Because that's kind of important.
He has when he was younger, but he almost avoids it. No, there is an association, which is tragic, which is that he and Harry were at Balmoral when news came of their mother's death. But, tragic as that association may be, my specific concern is that for the monarchy to continue to play the role that it does as a emotionally satisfying focus for national unity across the United Kingdom, then the Prince of Wales, when he becomes king, needs to be visible in every part of the United Kingdom and needs to embrace the traditions of every part of the United Kingdom. So the point has been made to me by a number of people who are in Scotland, committed to the continuation of the royal family, that they worry that there is something in William's makeup that is A, not that interested in Scotland, and B, resistant to being, as he might think of it, sort of encased in tartan or poured into tweed. And there's a broader point as well, which has been reported, that he also would like to get rid of some of what he considers to be the unnecessary flummery associated with the royal family. The garter ceremony and so on.
No, don't do that, William.
Exactly. And my worry would be that, in Shakespeare's words on Troilus and Cresside, take but degree away, untune that string, and hark what discord follows. There is a worry that in his admirable desire to show that he is a king dedicated to service in the future, that he may sacrifice some of the most important symbolic elements in Scotland and more broadly.
That's a really interesting point about Scotland. It's not something I had been familiar with. One reason I think for our king, our current king, his profound love of Scotland is partly because he had an extremely close relationship with the Queen Mother, who was herself Scottish. And but maybe as the generations have followed, they have felt less profoundly Scottish with every passing generation. But it is deeply important, and I'm not sure if, I suppose, for someone like Prince William, who I think is more, I guess, progressive is the word. I think there is this temptation to think of these things as arcane and a bit silly, without realising that actually they're not. It's not about you, the monarch, or the future monarch. It's about the history that is represented in these traditions, which in itself can be thrilling. I mean, the fact, for example, that in the coronation ceremony we have a spoon that was used at the coronation of Edward the Confessor is a glorious thing that fills me with a kind of wonder, and I'm not alone in feeling that. If the royal family if the monarchy becomes like any other institution that's frankly of the modern world and indistinguishable from it, then that kind of removes a big part of its appeal and power.
And it's undoubtedly the case that William believes in service, and during the time that I was Environment Secretary, I saw that he was extremely dedicated to contributing to the work to deal with the illegal wildlife trade and to support nature conservation. He was fascinated by the efforts that we were making to ensure that we could safeguard natural habitats in the UK and abroad. And then later, when I was Housing Secretary, he was very keen to use the patronage powers of the Duchy of Cornwall to help deal with homelessness. And that it's not just admirable, it's fantastic.
Yes.
But the worry would be that he would see himself as a sort of NGO president rather than UK king.
Yes.
And it is notoriously difficult for someone to give truly candid advice to a monarch or to a Prince of Wales about where their priorities might be wrong. You're welcome to give advice about how they might more effectively achieve what they say they want, but actually it's given to very few people to say, Your Royal Highness or Your Majesty, I think that's wrong. And I would hope that the wisdom that the current king has about his role will be passed on to William, because I think the Andrew squall, horrendous as it is,
Yes,
can be overcome. But the broader question is, how will the monarchy as an institution ensure that it maintains its distinctiveness and its mystique, as well as its power for supporting public service?
So the British authorities have banned Israeli fans from attending an upcoming match in the Europa League, citing security risks. And this decision has proved extremely controversial, not just criticised by members of the public, but overwhelmingly by members of this government, including Keir Starmer and many of his ministers. What is going on? And if the government feels so strongly about this, could they not overrule the decision to bar these Maccabi fans?
Birmingham is going on. This is a problem that originates from the very, very complicated politics and difficult politics of our second city. The drive to prevent fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv, which is Israel's leading team, playing Aston Villa, came from a newly elected Birmingham MP, Ayub Khan. He was elected to Birmingham Perry-Barr. He defeated a Labour MP, Khalid Mahmood, and Ayub Khan, who's a barrister, articulate guy, was elected as a Gaza independent, as a candidate who was there explicitly to say that the political establishment and Labour in particular had not been paying sufficient attention to what they call the genocide in Gaza, and in particular that the broader interests of minority constituents, especially Muslim constituents in Birmingham and across the UK, was not being represented by Labour. He got up a petition to say that there should be a ban on fans coming from Israel, and he was very clear that there were two reasons for it. The first is what he claimed was the fear of public disorder, and we might go into that in a second, whether that's the case that it's the Maccabi fans who would be the threat or the Maccabi fans who would be threatened. But the second reason is he said that because he believes that there's been a genocide in Gaza, that any Israeli team should be banned, because, of course, we would ban so he would argue, a Russian team because of what's going on in Ukraine, and the events in Gaza are, in his view, morally no different. Now, I think that is preposterous and wrong for a variety of reasons, but it's undoubtedly the case that Ayub Khan, who is an elected member of Parliament, is speaking to a constituency, not just Perry-Barr, within Birmingham, and it takes us back to, and this is not the only issue, comments that Robert Jenrick made at the which were reported at the time of the Conservative Party conference,
Yes,
about integration. He was talking about a different area.
Yeah,
in
he's talking
Birmingham.
about Handsworth.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I think it is inescapable, and I have experience of this from the time when I was a minister, we might touch on, that the degree of social cohesion and integration in Birmingham is, well, to put it mildly, it's not what it should be.
No. Many of my family are from Birmingham, live in and around Birmingham. I went to school in Birmingham. I don't think it's common enough knowledge, although I think it's increasingly becoming so, just how sectarian a city it is now becoming, and the way in which, although it's extremely diverse, capital D, area to area, it can be entirely segregated. You can have areas which are sort of 90% Pakistani Muslim, and then you can have a sort of overwhelmingly white area very nearby. So I think what Robert Jenrick was alluding to in his comments, which were considered controversial in many quarters, when he said, I've been in Handsworth and I haven't seen a white face, immediately people accused him of racism and trying to kind of stir up tensions and all the rest of it. Well, he was merely describing, and it's not an ideal state of affairs when you have parts of the city which are completely mono-ethnic. It suggests that integration isn't taking place, that there are parallel communities living side by side.
It is the case that you've had this process of segregation within the city exactly as you describe, and there are some parts of the city, so going constituency by constituency, there are some parliamentary constituencies like Birmingham Erdington and Birmingham Northfield that tend to have a significantly larger white working class population, and then there are others in the city, including in East Birmingham, where you have far fewer white working class citizens. Now, in some respects, you can argue that a city like Birmingham, second city of the empire, should reflect the very best of Britain's multi-ethnic traditions and multi-ethnic richness. The problem is that the determination of some within Birmingham to set themselves at loggerheads with other communities, or to seek to preserve particular views and traditions which are exclusionary. When I was Education Secretary, was alerted to a campaign by Islamist teachers, governors and parents to take over the running of state schools in such a way as to ensure that when it came to the curriculum, when it came to the banning of music, when it came to the segregation of sexes, that there was a distinct Islamist ethos in those schools, even extending to some of the people who were invited to speak in those schools. There was a hell of a row with local MPs, including Liam Byrne, saying that this was terribly unfair and
fake news,
yes, fake news and stigmatizing. But investigations by the Educational Inspectorate, investigations by a former Metropolitan Assistant Commissioner, Peter Clark, that there was a determined effort to Islamise those schools. The alarm bell was rung by a Sikh senior member of the teaching profession, and it was the teaching unions, whom I'd normally be first to criticise, who actually rang the alarm bell about what was going on to support this teacher. So you had a situation where a Sikh professional committed to helping children from minority ethnic backgrounds succeed, essentially, set the alarm bell ringing about what was happening. And then you had locally elected politicians who, rather than saying, look, there's a problem here and we need to address it, attempted to say, nothing to see here. And that was more than 10 years ago. And I think there's been a comprehensive failure on the part of many of the people within the political leadership in Birmingham, and more broadly, to acknowledge this challenge. And that's why, or it's one of the reasons why, we now have an MP in Birmingham who's elected on an explicitly sectarian basis.
Yes, and you see it in the sorts of causes Ayub Khan and other independent MPs are taking up. The Birmingham bin strike has still yet to be resolved, and there are parts of that city where it is the overwhelmingly working class areas of the city that have suffered the most. The wealthier areas are often paying for private waste disposal companies to deal with their rubbish. So they haven't had the kind of terrible public health problems that you see in those run down areas of the city, and it's a humanitarian issue.
Yes.
There are children growing up in communities where there are rodents and public health risks, and meanwhile the sectarian MPs are going on about building a new airport in Mirpur,
Yes.
the region of Pakistan where many of their constituents have ancestral links. And now with trying to bar Israeli football fans. You wonder if they had applied this kind of energy to dealing with the bin crisis, the city might be in a better state.
You're absolutely right. This strike's been going on for months. It has its roots in a perverse ruling about equal pay and whether or not people who work in some functions that are employed by Birmingham Council should be paid the same as those who are performing inevitably tougher and dirtier tasks. It should easily have been resolved by the local authority. It's a political failure there. But whatever the sins of the local authority or the faults of the trade unions, if I was an MP in Birmingham and I said to my constituents, do you know what? The fact that there's vermin running in the streets and that you can't get your bins collected, let's not worry about that. Let's have a performative exercise about a football match because we're anxious to make sure that everyone knows what we think about a conflict in the Middle East that has now ended as a result of a ceasefire. That's the really important thing. I would deserve to be thrown out. But it says something about the politics of the city at the moment that Ayub Khan and his supporters clearly think this is the right thing to do. And there's an added element to it, which I think is wicked. Ayub Khan's supporters decided at the weekend to picket the Home Secretary's constituency office. Shabana Mahmood, a Muslim woman who is Home Secretary and a Birmingham MP, someone whom, as you know, Maddie, I have an enormous amount of respect for, is essentially in the position of having her office picketed by men saying that she's not a good enough Muslim because she wants, essentially, law and order to be preserved and people to be able to go about their own business and football fans to be able to go to a match without being harassed. And it is striking that Shabana Mahmood and Jess Phillips, two female MPs, were the people who were most viciously targeted at the last general election by these sectarian figures. The guy who lost to seat, Khalid Mahmood, was also attacked because he had been termed not a good enough Muslim because he had actually defended what I did with the problem with schools over 10 years ago. And therefore, because he'd actually put the interests of his constituents over the interests of a group of extremists, he was regarded as somehow a sort of Uncle Tom figure.
Yes.
So you have this terrible situation whereby it's not just the ideology that's being promoted, it's also the case that you have a deliberate attempt to say, Khalid Mahmood, unless you're a Muslim on our terms, you're out. Shabana Mahmood, unless you're a Muslim on our terms, you're out. And Jess Phillips, you're a female MP who shouldn't be representing us, you're out. And that is their agenda. And it's in the Labour Party's interest to stand up to these people because they're not progressive but misguided. They're deliberately attempting to import or to exploit a politics not just of grievance, but a politics which is, in every respect malign.
I will say, though, that although I not for a second would condone the abuse that is doled out to these MPs, I can't help but feel that they are paying the price in 2025 for the sins of New Labour when for many years they adopted a policy of multiculturalism that basically said we will allow these parallel communities to live side by side. There was a time, and I remember it very clearly, where pointing out the issues with integration and, as you did, trying to raise the alarm, you were liable to be described as a racist and stigmatised. Now, I think things are changing quickly. I feel that the Overton window is shifting and we can now have a more honest conversation. I don't think 10 years ago people would have been talking about, for example, cousin marriage, what that does in terms of terrible health outcomes for the children born of these unions, for example. Birmingham Children's Hospital spends an awful lot of money on looking after the poor children who have terrible genetic deformities as a result of their sort of consanguinity of their parents. these issues were not being spoken of in day-to-day politics until very, very recently. And I do blame the atmosphere that we had under Tony Blair and New Labour, where they were only too happy to point the finger and stigmatise people who tried to raise the alarm.
I think the debate has changed profoundly. I know that Blair was worried about some of these questions, even if it may not always have been apparent during the time that he was Prime Minister. He was concerned about Islamist organisations and the way in which the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, for example, were operating. But you're right, the broad climate wasn't conducive to open discussion of these things. I remember also when David Cameron said multiculturalism has failed when he gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference about how to deal with Islamism and extremism, that there were people within the then Conservative government, Dominic Grieve, Saida Vaizey, who clutched their pearls at that point and said that it was completely inappropriate. But we now have, I think, a more open discussion, and that was, I think, reinforced at the weekend when Katie Lamb talked about the need not just to control who comes here, but questions about people who are currently here legally. I believe that she was talking about people who were not yet British citizens or not yet enjoying settled status, but people who were here on indefinite leave to remain tracks. And she was questioning whether or not it was right for people, as I say, who are currently living and working here, but not British citizens, to be here. I entirely think that is a legitimate debate. But for me, the most challenging question is how do we collectively, whatever the immigration status of any particular individual, tackle extremism within the country now? Because the 7/7 bombers, for example, their ringleader was someone who'd been born and brought up in British institutions, and there is a broader question of challenging ideas, which I think is, of course, related to the question of people's background and so on. But unless you actually, I think, prioritise dealing with extremism, then you get caught up in other issues, important as they are, which are not as important to me.
In a way, I'm glad that we have more of these MPs in Parliament because they are increasingly saying the quiet bit out loud. For example, with this football decision, Ayub Khan initially said it's to do with the thuggery of Maccabi fans, but then in the same breath he starts talking about Israeli foreign policy.
Yes.
It's very clear why he thinks they should be banned. And to be fair, Maccabi is a club that has that reputation. It's sort of like the Millwall of Israel, but the fact that he pivoted so soon shows what his true motivations were. In a way, I'm glad that it's all out there in the open, because what we had previously was Labour MPs especially often playing this game where they'd show a bit of leg, they would flirt with ideas, for example, like having some kind of blasphemy law, which was something I've seen Labour MPs mention in Parliament. When it's mentioned, I've seen Keir Starmer equivocate in response to it. He won't quite say, yes, we should have a blasphemy law, but he doesn't say, no, this is a liberal free society, we value free speech, etc. This is Britain, sod off, basically, which is what he should say. But they won't explicitly condemn, but nor will they go as strongly. In a way, I'm glad that we know what the reality is, and we can therefore respond to it more robustly than this mealy-mouthed nonsense.
I think that's right. I should just say one thing. I may be the only person in Parliament who has both been to a Millwall match at the New Den and seen Maccabi Tel Aviv play at their stadium in Israel. I've been to both. I say that I felt safer in the Maccabi Tel Aviv stadium, but that is no disrespect to Millwall fans, many of whom I love. And if you are listening, Rod Little, I'd be delighted to go with you the next time that you invite me.
So in the Sunday papers, I saw a lot of pictures of various British celebrities at a glitzy gala event organised by the British Museum. Some outfits were better than others, I think it's fair to say. But it seems that the British Museum is trying to do what the Metropolitan Museum in New York has done and establish this kind of annual fashion jamboree. Do you know any more about this?
Yes. Nicholas Cullinan, who's the new director of the British Museum, who was appointed by the board of which George Osborne is chair, felt that the British Museum should up its fundraising activities and also use the magnificent space that they have in order to invest the institution with even more glamour. You're right. The Met Gala, which has been running for years now, has become a celebration of fashion as well as a massive fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And a wind tour, nuclear winter. The Queen of Vogue, the maven who is depicted in The Devil Wears Prada, was the sort of fashion queen responsible for getting a variety of Hollywood and other stars to turn up on the red carpet outside. So it was the fashion event of the year as well as a fundraiser. This has been an attempt at the British equivalent. Now, you have had, I think, in the coverage, some pictures of genuine, figures of grace and beauty, like Kristen Scott Thomas on the red carpet. But you've also had one or two perhaps less gracious images. My dear friend, our former culture minister, Ed Vaizey, was also, perhaps unsurprisingly, a guest there. He was pictured afterwards in a pink check Harrington jacket and baker boy cap with a pink bow tie, looking for all the world like an LSD-infused image of Del Boy. And I think that, in a way, one of the things about the difference between anything that happens in New York and anything that happens in London, whether it's the Met or the British Museum, is that here in Britain, there will always be an element of irony and subversion.
Do you think he was being ironic with that? My first thought was Peaky Blinders but gay. So I think Del Boy not a million miles away from that.
It could well be. It could well
Bless
be.
him.
But
good for him, because it takes, if you're
takes a bit of courage.
A retired politician, to go for an out there outfit when you could have worn a normal tuxedo with a little twist. He really went for it. Fair play for trying, but perhaps not everyone should try.
No, I think that is absolutely correct. There is an element of courage there. The picture of him shows him.
Do you remember Ian Poulter, the golfer?
Yes.
Well, very eccentric outfits. This looks a bit like one of Ian Poulter's.
No. I imagine he could well be wearing +4s and Argyle socks too.
Yeah.
But
Camp Tintin.
But overall, I think the British Museum, amazing institution, raising money from charities and sponsorship, wonderful thing. But we'll never in Britain quite do a Met Gala thing, because of the Met Gala thing. Everyone is there with their impassive model face, and everyone is there taking the whole thing incredibly seriously. In Britain, we can't take ourselves too seriously.
Well, we ought not to anyway.
Precisely.
Yes.
And so, the how do you make sure, apart from getting Ed Vaizey on the guest list, that you always bring a sense of humour to these things? That it is, you have the subversiveness of a Tracy Emin infusing the whole thing, and at the same time, the other challenge for the British Museum is it is, like so many institutions, at the node point, if that's the right phrase, of various culture wars. So there's the ongoing Elgin Marbles row. So the Greek Minister of Culture...
It's quite top trolling that they had the dinner in front of the contested marble, because I think a lot of the guests would have hated that.
They had the dinner in front of the Elgin Marbles. The Greek Minister of Culture...
Oh, no, they didn't.
Objected.
This is a trolling event. It's pure trolling.
Because they said that the marbles might be damaged by the A-listers who were there tucking into their tiffin boxes of haute Indian cuisine. But it was also the case that there was a Palestine campaign outside, and one of the waitresses interrupted George Osborne's speech to unfurl the Palestinian flag. George said, after she was escorted gently away, "Isn't it great that we live in a democracy?" So he handled it graciously. However, it is the case that there were a number of people, including Idris Elba and also Zadie Smith, who had been invited, who said, no, we're not going because there was going to be a Palestinian protest outside, and because BP, the oil company, sponsor the British Museum. And frankly, who are these flakes? How do Zadie Smith and Idris Elba think that their chauffeurs get them from A to B, other than, occasionally using fossil fuel? And also, when was the last time that either of them, were consulted by diplomats and peacemakers about how to resolve problems in the Middle East?
I don't think we should give these people. We shouldn't have any more events that give these people an opportunity to be insufferable luvvies. We shouldn't. If we're going to have the British equivalent of the Met Ball, it should be something very different. Like, we're not going to out Hollywood or out lovey those guys. I mean, the Met Ball, it's just increasingly this tendency towards people wearing no clothes at all. We're not going to out nudity them, and nor do we want to.
No.
Frankly, we should never have got rid of the debutante balls. That's the only kind of ball that we ought to be doing in Britain. But failing that, we could do, maybe you could find a pub. There's got to be some old spoons that's called the Metropolitan or something. And the ball could be a series of British women in the middle of winter turning up and proving that, they don't need coats in the winter. That would be very sound.
And so would you have, whichever spoons it was, the Met?
Yeah.
And then you have people in...
I want Gemma Collins, not Vaizey, sorry.
And who would be your male...
Frankly, I think she should have his peerage.
Yeah, we'll start the campaign now. And who would be the men that you would have accompanying Gemma Collins on the red carpet outside the Metropolitan pub in, I don't know, Chigwell?
I think it should be only people from Towie or a hereditary peer. I want the Duke of Rutland with Gemma Collins.
I think that would be Britain as its best, posh and bosh together. And I think you're absolutely right that what we should do is that we should have Towie, or very possibly Geordie Shore, reality stars teamed with the very best of the aristocracy. Though, to be fair, there were some genuine aristos at the British Museum Met Gala. So Earl Spencer's daughters were there, and I think it was also the case that there was a touch of a reality star, in the broadest sense of the word, quality there as well. I think that there was some sort of Beckham-adjacent figures who were there as well. But you're right. I think Nicholas Cullinan and George Osborne should recognise that rather than trying to do a sort of Brit derivative of Hollywood or Manhattan glamour, that actually what we should do is have something more gloriously Anglo.
Also, maybe don't try and launch a big new event until you've figured out not how not to lose hundreds of thousands of priceless artifacts from the museum, or to get massive breaches of data. Get the basics right before you try to launch something else, maybe? Just a thought.
And do you think that any of the guests might have thought, well, if the British Museum takes such a casual approach towards their exhibits, what's to stop me taking one of these lovely marbles?
Yeah.
Shoving it in.
I think we should check. I think we need to check Kristen Scott Thomas's downstairs loo just to be sure there's not a bit of marble on.
I think send the police round to everyone afterwards. And looking at Ed Vaizey's Harrington bomber jacket, it may well be the case that there is an Elgin Marble stuffed down there. Either that or the Manjaro hasn't been working.
Oh, bless him. We've been very mean to poor Ed.
We have, but I think that he, like every peer, and I should know, would rather be talked about than not talked about. And next week on Quite Right, I and Maddie will be thinking about other parliamentarians whose outrageous attachment to being in the limelight deserves to be skewered, and we'll also be reflecting on the future of British institutions which are under assault and which need defence.